Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience as at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. And I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you are attending live, a reminder that you're in listen-only mode. If you look at your toolbar, you'll see a Q&A box. You can go ahead and start typing questions in there right now. And if there's anything that you would like to contribute to any of the conversations we're having, feel free to put that in the chat box. And today I'll be talking about a tool that I recently created and some questions that were emailed to me. If you're watching this as a recording, just a disclaimer that today is March 6, 2024. So everything I say is true today to the best of my knowledge, but things change very quickly at NIH. So I would encourage you always to verify any key information. So what you should be viewing in the library right now, well, we're kind of at the beginning of the cycle 2 preparations. So right now we are in the midst of the boot camp, and I think I recognize a lot of names here from last Friday's boot camp. So doing something a little bit different this year, we're presenting boot camp instead of as kind of a data dump as a half day of information. We're doing a chapter a week for 4 weeks. So we began last Friday on March 1st with preparation. If you missed it, no worries. There's a video, a recording of that session up in the learning management system. And you can register for the boot camp very easily on the website and start attending this Friday. It's 2 p.m. Eastern time. The sessions go anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, depending on the amount of material and the number of questions that are asked. The other things that I would suggest that you take a look at there are 2 updated courses in the library. So this week we dropped an update to the 4 rigor scoring criteria and optimize your funding mechanism. In addition, this month will be recording an update to the Navigate the Review Process course and Master the R series at the end of the month. Based on how I felt the updates went when I presented them live at boot camp, I'll be recording an update to those. So those will probably be released sometime in April, depending on how long it takes the Massachusetts Medical Society to review them. So NIH updates, you probably all saw a notice recently about changes, not marking changes to NIH resubmissions, and I have a question related to that. So I'm going to hold on to that until after the presentation. I'm getting a lot of questions about this notice, so I think it's probably, I may have talked about it in the last AGE, but I think it bears repeating. So I'm going to pause here. We don't have a guest today, but I do have a tool that I developed that I would love to share with you. So let me share that. So you should be seeing grant mechanism decisions for NIH, K, and R applicants. So this is a tool that I developed when I was working on the update to optimize your funding mechanism. And it's kind of based on the questions that I get from people who are brand new to NIH and they're, junior faculty, and they're coming to me either with a very set idea of the mechanism they want or with very little sense of which mechanisms might be a good fit for them, and the kinds of questions that I run through with them to try to figure out which mechanism is the optimal one for them. So the first thing I usually ask is whether they're R15 eligible. So for those who don't know, the R15 area grant is meant for organizations that historically have had very limited NIH funding over there's a certain dollar cap over a certain number of years for an organization to be eligible, and a PI must also meet certain eligibility requirement. this is really meant to level the playing field a little bit so that if somebody is applying from a university that has a teaching orientation and very few resources in terms of core facilities and pre-award support and all of that, that they're not competing against organizations that have a lot of resources. So if you're R15 eligible, almost without exception, that's going to be the right mechanism for you. But for a very large number of you, you're not going to be R15 eligible. So then we get to the question of mentoring and whether you feel that you need mentoring to realize your vision for your independent research career. So if you do, then you're probably looking at the Career Development Awards or the K series mechanisms. However, my next question for the person is always, how much early stage investigator time do you have left? So recall, I know that we've talked about this ad nauseam, but bear with me because I'm a little obsessed about people getting enough R01 submissions in on their under their ESI funding advantage. So early stage investigator, you're 10 years or less from your terminal degree or your last clinical training. Like if you did a clinical fellowship, the clock would start at the end of that. And you've never been a PI on an R01 or equivalent. It confers a very significant funding advantage. So the thing is that most career development awards are 5 years, and it may take several tries to land them. So it could take several years of applications to land a K submission. And then you're not eligible for a release in the percent effort until year 4. So you're kind of locked into that and not able to apply for an R01 for the time that you're putting in the applications and then the first 3 years of the award. So typically what I ask is, I typically ask how much ESI time they have left. And if they have, like more than 5 years, yeah, go for it. If you want to do a career development award, that's great. If you don't, you may want to go back into the independent R series. And, the next question is, do you have enough data and publications to be competitive on an R01? And if you're just swimming in data and publications, first or senior author publications with your team, by all means, go for the R01. If not, maybe consider one of the small format Rs. So the next question I would ask is whether or not you're thinking of conducting a trial, an NIH-defined clinical trial under that particular mechanism. If you are, that eliminates the R03. The budget is not large enough, and most R03 NOFOs don't allow any trial work under them. So you're really looking at the R21 or the R34, the R21 being typically a 2-year award capped at 275,000 in directs, and the R34 typically being a 3-year award capped at I think it's 300,000 in directs, although I've seen them go up to 600,000 depending on the mechanism. There's no parent R34 anymore. So those are your two options here. And if you are not doing a trial, you're probably going to be looking at the R03 or the R21. The R03 has a smaller budget. It's 2 years capped at 100,000 directs typically. And it's meant for, less risky, smaller projects. Sometimes it's a self-contained secondary data analysis. And the R21 is 275K in directs over 2 years, and you can conduct a trial there. So this is very broad brushstrokes. So I know that there are nuances and special circumstances and other sorts of considerations, but I hope that this flow chart is kind of a quick way for a person to begin to think about which mechanisms might make sense for their career stage. This tool is available as a course supplement at the very beginning, lesson 1 of my updated Optimize the Funding Mechanism course. So if you feel this would be helpful to you, or if you feel it would be helpful to people you mentor, feel free to download that and distribute that. There's lots more detail in the course itself. And it's not a very long course. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes, maybe 30. It's not that long a course. So if that's something that you feel would be helpful for you or someone you mentor, please feel free to take a look at that. The overwhelming majority of people in this session have free access to all of these courses through their university membership. So I'm going to stop this share there because I see that questions are piling up. And I do have, as I said, I have a couple of questions that were emailed to me. I am going to answer one of them right away because I think I'm getting a lot of questions about this. So it has to do with this issue of this notice that came out about 2 weeks ago, saying that you're not allowed to mark changes on an A1, an NIH resubmission. So I've gotten all kinds of, like people are kind of like, what's happening? So let me give you a little history of this. It's not really new. I think NIH is just trying to draw attention to this. Prior to about 2016, you were required to mark changes in an A1. So you had your A0, it wasn't funded, you resubmitted it as an A1. And then you had to, in the research strategy, mark the exact things that you changed. And for those of you old enough to remember this, it could have been people used italics. Sometimes they used a bar in the margin to indicate where text had been changed. People didn't use different font color because back then it wasn't allowed, although it is now. But those are the kind of the things. Sometimes people would have put a box around text that had been changed. Then a notice came out around 2016 saying you were no longer required to make those changes, but you could still make them if you wanted to. And then sometime after that, there was language on the NIH website that said you were not allowed to mark changes on a resubmission, but it was kind of buried in the instructions on one kind of not very prominent website. And by the way, this is all laid out in a blog post that we have coming out soon and in our most recent newsletter. I think the newsletter is actually coming out this week, so you'll see all these links in there. Now there's a notice that just came out reiterating that you cannot mark changes in the resubmission, and people are kind of worried about like, what is this change? What does this mean? It's not a change, really. I think they're just trying to draw attention to the fact that they really don't want you marking changes in the resubmission. So my suggestion for people when they're writing a resubmission is to use an outline in the resubmission. So, if you're writing it this year before the change in the scoring criteria would be A, significance, B, innovation, C, approach, C1, team, C2, preliminary data, et cetera. And using an outline system, I feel like it can help you when you're writing the one-page introduction to the revised application. You can refer to specific sections in the research strategy, and it will be really clear to reviewers what text was changed because you're using this outline to orient them to a specific place in the research strategy. But you cannot mark changes anymore in the research strategy. It's not allowed at all. So you can definitely format your A1 to facilitate skimming. You just can't mark something as updated from the A0. So I hope that clears that up. I'm going to start working my way through these questions. I'm working on an ESI R01. I want to expand the scope of research to include a discipline, not my field, with experts I'm starting to collaborate with. They are full professors with multiple R01s. Is there a limit to how much they can be involved as a co-I in order to maintain my ESI status for the submission? I hope this makes sense. This makes perfect sense. So I'm going to explain this a little more fully in case people don't understand what is being asked here. If you have an ESI funding advantage on an R01, all of the PIs must be PIs, principal investigators. All the PIs must have ESI funding advantage in order to get the funding advantage. They must all be ESI in order to get the funding advantage. If one of them is not ESI, then everybody loses the ESI funding advantage on that application. So this person is submitting as a PI so that she gets the ESI funding advantage under R01. And she has these other people who, like down the line, are probably going to be multi PIs on future submissions. But right now, she doesn't want to make them multi PIs because they don't have ESI status. So her question is, how can I structure this? What kind of percent effort should I be giving these people as co-investigators so it doesn't look fishy to reviewers? Like I have to make sure they understand that these are not PIs. They really are not PIs. So and it's tricky. And sometimes reviewers do call somebody out on this, but I do think reviewers also understand that NESI is trying to get their independent lab off the ground, and that this is how it works. You have to set up collaborations with people who will be multi PIs down the road. So I think start, like if aim one can be yours, right? And then as you explore different aspects of the project, somebody else is overseeing other portions of it, but it doesn't look like I have aim one and this co-I has aim two and that co-I has aim three. Try to make it so that it is more tightly integrated with the part that you're doing, and then drop their percent effort to something like you're probably going to be around 40% effort, maybe drop your percent effort to their percent effort to something like 20%. And like I don't do budgets, so these are guesses on the numbers. I would work with your pre-award support office, but I would do that and try to really beef up the part that you're doing, and make their portions a little more scaled back and like ancillary to the main part that you're doing. So often it will fly with reviewers because they know that you're trying to get your research enterprise off the ground, and that in the future, these are going to be multi PIs on future submissions. So I would just don't write it like a multi PI and drop their percent effort down. I hope that answers the question. If R01 grant as ESI within the ESI payline for the Institute, how likely is it to be funded? Could it be discussed with the program officer? Also, in the summary statement, I see one reviewer was negative, a score of 6 for a section, whereas other reviewers gave 2 and 1. Could I ask the PO to interpret this? Okay, so this is 2 parts, so let me answer each part of these separately. So this is a person asking if the score is within the ESI payline, how likely is it to be funded, and could it be discussed with the PO? So there's never a guarantee for funding unless, like you're ranked first in your study section, then, you're going to get funded. But by and large, there's never any guarantee of funding. And right now, the notice of awards are being held up because NIH doesn't have a funding bill. So Congress has not passed the FY appropriation funding bill, and NIH and all of HHS, Health and Human Services, doesn't have a funding bill. So the institutes don't have a budget. We're well into October, November, December, January. We're moving into our 6th month of federal year 24 without a budget. And typically what that means is that institutes will operate at 80% of the previous year's budget just to hedge their bet in case there's a budget cut. So it may get funded, but the notice of award is probably being held up right now. You definitely can talk to the program officer about it. They may or may not have sat in on the study section where it was reviewed. Even if they didn't, they can still help you interpret the summary statements. If they did, they may have notes about the discussion at the study section and may be able to give you some insights into the discussion. Which answers part of question 2, which is I have these disparate scores. One reviewer gave a great score, another not so great. And can I discuss that with the PO? You definitely can. Of course, they can't give you particulars. They can't tell you who the assigned reviewers were, but they could kind of give you a sense of what their interpretation was of the discussion in the room and what the issues were. And how to address a potential resubmission if it's needed. So yeah, I would always have a conversation with the program officer about a review. even if it didn't go to the study section, they can help you interpret the summary statements, but especially if it went to the study section meeting, and especially if they attended it, they can give you often great insights. Okay, when you say enough are submissions, do you mean because it potentially, I knew somebody was going to ask this. The words were coming out of my mouth, and I was thinking, like, somebody's going to ask me, what is enough? What's the operational definition of enough? When you say enough are submissions under the ESI status, do you mean because it potentially takes so long to land one? Because once you get your first R, you lose ESI, right? Yes. So the goal is NIH grant writing is an iterative process. I think most of you know this by now. Um, it is going to likely, statistically, very few people are funded on their first submission, and it is likely to take several attempts to land an R01. So, and you're going to tinker with your approach, right? Like you're going to titrate your approach. So you're going to do your due diligence and try to identify the optimal mechanism and sponsoring institute and NOFO, and most importantly, the optimal study section. And then you're gonna, throw the pasta on the wall and see if it sticks, right? So, but when it doesn't, even when it doesn't, then you're going to retool. You're going to titrate your approach and try something else. So it usually takes multiple attempts. And, even though you're allowed 2 submissions, you know that if an A1 is not funded, you can retool the idea and put it in as an A0 again. And it's not uncommon for people to submit a somewhat similar idea 2, 3, 4, 5 times before they land that first R1. It takes at least 9 months to get a funding decision. So that's a lot of years, right? Like if you're working backward off your ESI expiration, in an ideal world, I would love to see people have enough time to put in 3 submissions because you put it before ESI expires, because you put in the A0, 9 to 12 months later, you get the funding decision. Not funded, you put in the A1. And you may need time to address the critiques. So putting in the A1 at 9 to 12 months is optimistic. And then if that's not funded, ideally you'd slip a new submission in just as ESI is expiring, because then, like, if you get, let's say your ESI is expiring on June 30th and you put in a June 5th R01 as an A0, and then your ESI expires. If that A1 is not funded, if that A0 is not funded, the A1 will be reviewed as an ESI as long as you resubmit within 13 months. So in my ideal world, I try to work backward off the ESI expiration to try to get 3 submissions in, which is, at least 3 years, 4 years, like 5 years, like it's somewhere in there. So when you ask how many is enough, that's kind of what I try to do. And some people try to do more. Do you have suggestions for how to respond to a reviewer in the 1-page intro to a resubmission and in revisions of the text whose critique is that you are going to do something in way A, when in the text you discussed the issue and explained why A doesn't work, and so you'll do B? How do you politely tell them that they should have actually read the grant? Thank you so much for this, because I get this question weekly. So what do you do in the more general sense? What do you do if you disagree with a reviewer, or if you feel that they were kind of a bonehead and didn't actually read very carefully? So I am not a fan of saying, and you'll see this in my master resubmissions course, I'm not a fan of saying we respectfully disagree, or we actually did do that. I really prefer to just answer with a fact. So if the person says, we don't think you should use method A, and you were not proposing method A, you were proposing method B all along, you can just respond by saying, we plan to use method B and this method is described in detail and blah, blah, blah. Just answer with a fact. You're just going to piss them off if you say, well, as we explained in the first submission, like, don't do it. It's not a pissing match. Don't piss them off, like, just don't do it. And I will say, there may be a piece of this for you to own, because if a reviewer missed that fact, there may be something in the way your application is formatted. Now, remember that grant applications are skimmed. So if they somehow missed the information, maybe it was written and formatted beautifully and they were just kind of in a coma when they read it. Like they could have been hungry. It could have been 4 a.m. It could have been the eighth application they reviewed in a row. They could have had an argument with their spouse. Who knows? Like lots of this is not in your control. But I would double check to make sure that your headers are formatted properly to facilitate skimming. So, on the resubmission, on the A1 research strategy, you could have a header that says why we have chosen not to use method A, why we have chosen to use method B, so that like it's bolded headline, newspaper headline style, and they just can't miss the reasoning there. But in the intro, I just would just state a fact and let it go and just move on. So, and this happens all the time to everybody. This is not like it happens. Reviewers are human. Okay, so did I do that part? Yep. For reviewers who skim the application before or during the meeting, you have suggested using formatting to highlight key points. Do you have suggestions for bold versus underline? How much is too much? Do you want the reviewers to be able to essentially read the highlighted parts by themselves and have it tell the story? This is a great question. So this person is referring to the fact that in my trainings, I always suggest that people format to facilitate skimming, because your assigned reviewers in theory will have read the whole application. But at the study section meeting, they're going to be skimming to jog their memory because they will have read a stack of other applications as well. The vast majority of the study section will only ever skim it while it's being discussed. So skimming is basically the main way that people are going to absorb the information. So I'm a big fan of newspaper style headlines that contain the key take-home message with the details below it, the way you write a newspaper headline. So what formatting and how much is too much? So I have a slide in Master the R series. I think it's in either chapter 3 or 4, where I go into detail about this. Let's start with shading. So I shade the major subheaders: significance, innovation, and approach. Sometimes I'll use colored font for subheaders like C1, C2, C3. I might make those blue. In terms of bold and underline, bold is stronger than underlining. So for me, my personal preference is to bold a header. And I would try never to bold more than a phrase or a sentence if you can, because it can get very heavy-handed very quickly, and then it feels to the reader like an assault rather than something that's helping you skim. And then typically I use underlining for emphasis within a paragraph. So for example, if I'm writing a significance section, I might have bolded headers that say like clinical problem, rigor of prior research, proposed project, or I might use entire sentences that capture the key take-home message of some background paragraph below it. That would be bolded. And then within it, I might judiciously underline a little bit here or there, but try never to bold more than a sentence at a time, and try not to have more than like 4 or 5 sentences on a page bolded. So maybe like 4 or 5 lines, let's say. And for underlining, try to do key phrases here or there. I'm not a fan of like, for example, I'll often get an application where the person says, our hypothesis is that blah, 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 and it goes on for 7 lines, and they underline all 7 lines. All you need to do is bold the words project hypothesis colon, and then just state it. You don't have to underline the whole thing. And then it serves as a signpost so that when reviewers are skimming and they're looking for the hypothesis, they see project hypothesis in bold and they can go there and read it. You don't have to underline every single line of it. That feels like an assault on the senses. So that's for me personally what I prefer to do. And I have some examples of that in particularly in Master the R Series Chapter 3. There are some examples of that in the course supplements. And we are out of time, but I see that somebody put something in the chat. Oh, yes, actually, Riley put the URL to download that mechanism flow chart that I just showed you. That's an asset giveaway on our website right now. It's meant to accompany the Optimize Your Funding Mechanism course as well. So if you want to go and take a deeper dive into that or direct your mentee to do so, feel free to do that. That's those updated courses dropped this week. So I think that's it. We are out of time, and I answered all the questions except for one that I got via email, which I'll save for next time. And I hope to see a bunch of you at the boot camp on Friday. So today is the 6th. The next boot camp is March 8th, 2 p.m. Eastern time. We'll start sharp at 2 p.m. Eastern time because it's lots of material. And it will be chapter 2 specific aims. So it's a newly updated talk. And come with your questions. You guys have been asking really, really good questions. So I really appreciate everybody attending and participating. So that is it for me. I hope that this was helpful, and I wish you all luck, and I'll see some of you on Friday. Have a great week and good luck with your grant application. Take care. Bye-bye.